Okay, it's 7:02. We'll get started slowly. We'll start with some slow introductions, but hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Daniel Valenti. I'm the Managing Director in the United States for Ingenious Prep, and joining us is Shoshana.
Hi everyone, I'm Shoshana Feinberg. I'm a Senior Counselor and former Admissions Officer here at Ingenious, and I spent time at Northwestern for my undergrad and graduate studies, and I also read applications there, so that's the perspective I'm coming in with.
Perfect, thanks so much, Shoshana. And as we get into this, I just wanted to offer a brief introduction. We're going to really focus on the application persona in this webinar. We want to do a deep dive into the application persona, talk about some new topics we haven't talked about in recent webinars, and hopefully give you guys some very helpful information. So a little more on the introductions. I know I mentioned my name's Daniel. I went to Harvard undergrad and then University of Chicago for graduate school. Now I'm here in New Haven at our headquarters for Ingenious Prep. I'm not clearly at our actual headquarters because of coronavirus, but I am very near our headquarters, which has been great. And as you'll see in the entire presentation, both my email and my WeChat ID are at the bottom. So I'm always around to answer questions on WeChat and email if there's anything I can do to help you. As Shoshana said, she went to Northwestern for a couple degrees and was also an admissions officer at Northwestern Chicago. So we probably won't get into which is the better business school between Northwestern and University of Chicago on this webinar, but maybe on a future webinar, that would be a great topic. Okay, guys, just for the introduction, for those of you who have seen Ingenious webinars before, this may look familiar to you, but I'm just going to spend a couple minutes going over our basic services and what we do. As many of you know, we have over 150 former admissions officers like Shoshana who help our students craft the very best applications possible. So this is just a brief glimpse of some of the former admissions officers that work with us here at Ingenious, and that would be paired with students who work on their admissions process with us. In addition to the admissions officer, we also add a graduate coach to the team, and a graduate coach is usually an expert in writing, somebody who has successfully applied and been admitted to places themselves, and who are kind of in the weeds on the day-to-day line editing and making sure those essays are perfect, even when there's 10 or even sometimes 15 drafts before we're ready to submit. As you guys know, we rely very heavily on our curriculum. We rely very heavily on our excellent staff, who include, Ivy League teaching fellows and the like. And we do academic mentorships as well, which are more of kind of the classes, but we can get into that later. Finally, this is kind of the last of the salesy moment. This is just some of our offerings with Ingenious Prep. I do want to point out that we're getting into application season, so things are filling up. Things are getting pretty busy for our counselors here at Ingenious Prep. So it is really time to start to think about applications. Finally, just a few results to share with you. Just this last cycle, this last year, we were proud to have 57 Ivy League acceptances, and a full 352 people got into a top 30 university, or 352 acceptance letters from top 30 universities. So we're very proud of that, and we hope to continue and improve that trend going forward. This is very similar data shown in a graph just for you to see. The Duke and Cornell look like a little bit of the outliers here. We definitely leverage the Cornell early decision for the benefit of some of our students. All right, I'm going to actually turn it over to Shoshana now as she starts to dive into the topic at hand, which is the application persona and what it means when applying.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So first, we want to start with a trivia question. How long do you think a typical admissions officer spends reading one application? So you've seen what all is included there, obviously your transcripts, all your essays, your letters of rec, your activities list, right? How long, you can use the chat feature here to take a guess on your trivia question here. How long do you think, how many minutes do you think typically?
Or days.
Or days, yeah, or days. Maybe we contemplate for days on end, comparing and contrasting.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes, 10 minutes? No. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. 4 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 15, 1 minute. 1 minute. That would be pretty quick to get through all that, but okay, 20 minutes. So we're ranging from 1 to 20 minutes here.
Okay. Drum roll.
10 to 15. So you guys are in the ballpark, but obviously that's very quick. It's definitely a quick read through everything. Definitely at Northwestern, I would read every single page of the application, but I would go quickly through it, right? So we don't skip entire sections, but certainly that would be part of it, is kind of making sure you're reading one after another, and it is pretty quick turnaround. So given how quick that is, part of our discussion today is about the application persona, which is really kind of a slogan or tagline that you can think of that will summarize your application or bring a common thread through your application. The purpose of the application persona is really to make sure your takeaway point is emphasized, right? That as I'm reading your different parts of the application, I'm getting a cohesive sense of who you are as a person. It should also capture what is most memorable or unique about you, right? Given that it's this huge pile of applications and I'm going to be reading one after another for 10 to 15 minutes, we really want to see that you're memorable and unique as a person, that I'm remembering something about you. I'm not forgetting you right when I finish reading your application, right? And then the application persona should also kind of capture how your experiences and skills relate to your future plans. So for instance, if you've done a bunch of things in high school, how are those connecting to what your goals are in college and beyond in terms of your career and everything that will happen after college? So an example here in the box, you can see a multilingual public health campaigner bringing science and culture together. So that might be one student's application persona sort of tagline that they would use and keep in mind as they strategize all of the pieces of their application. So just like big major companies come up with these taglines, the application persona can kind of work as your own personal branding. So just like Apple or Nike or BMW here might have very strong brands that they are attracting customers and that customers remember them and they're kind of what they're all about as a brand, your application persona should do the same thing about you in terms of selling yourself as an applicant for college. So you can see here, this is a quote from one of our FAOs, Kat McManus. She worked at Princeton, UPenn, and Dartmouth, talking about the purpose of the application persona in achieving cohesion, right? So she says, the most important thing admissions officers look for is cohesion with the rest of the application. Then it doesn't matter what order the app gets read in. It needs a cohesion of ideas, meaning you can pull a common thread through all materials in the application. So for instance, when reading an application, the admissions officer should think, oh, of course, this essay is the topic this student would write, given what I already know about this student from their extracurriculars, right? We're learning different pieces about you as a person, but hopefully, again, by the end, we're getting this cohesive picture of who you are and what you care about. So again, the key takeaway here is that if the admissions committee is going to remember your application, they will need to be able to summarize what distinguishes you in just a few words, right? They're going to read your application, then go to a bigger group and have to kind of summarize you and fight for you and say, hey, I read this student, John, who does X, Y, Z, and be able to kind of convince another group who you are and what you care about. So if they can't summarize you, that makes that process very difficult. So we just kind of covered point 2 here, why it's vital, the application persona, and we'll talk next about how to kind of form your own unique and compelling persona. So here we are, how to create it. So what actually makes for an excellent application persona? Couple traits listed here. Of course, the first one would be uniqueness, right? As we think about, again, this huge pile of applications, an admissions officer reading it in 10 minutes, you really want your unique factors to stand out, right? What separates you from the crowd? How will you be different from others? We also want it to have a creative element, right? So rather than being something very obvious about you, we'll hope that it will dig into something deeper that makes you special. Again, kind of drawing on that unique factor. Third, we'll want it to really be authentic, right? I'll have a level of authenticity that really captures who you are and what matters to you. So if you try to say, oh, I love, this subject and I don't see any evidence of that in your application, that would be a hard sell, right? It'd be hard to convince me that that's an authentic interest of yours. So we want that to be really clear, that it's genuine, that it really represents you. And the last thing here is your memorableness. So making sure, again, kind of like the uniqueness and the creativity, it's really something that you will remember about this person and that it will help them stand out. So in terms of identifying your own application persona, we have a couple steps listed here. So first, you'll kind of create a master resume. This will be a big list of everything you've done in high school, and it's a great way to kind of see on paper how you present yourself, right? So admissions officers, unfortunately, I always tell my students, won't get the pleasure of sitting and chatting with you for hours on end. They will only get to read the couple pages that you write, right? So we want to make sure that that captures who you are and what makes you unique and interesting and different, right? So your master resume will cover your honors, your awards, your activities, maybe summer programs. And even if you want to include kind of free time, things you spend time doing in your free time, that would be helpful too. So that you can really see, what do I genuinely care about as a person? Even if it's not an activity per se that's resume worthy, it might be a trait that we pull into your application persona. So step one here would be kind of grouping your activities with similar traits. You might see your big list and say, oh, I'm noticing maybe these three all relate to helping people, right? Or maybe these ones all relate to educating someone, or these are all related to science and robotics, right? The next thing you'll do is, of course, label the category. So sometimes people use color codes. Think about sort of how much you're emphasizing different things in your resume to find those key themes and categories. Step three here will be to look at how these kind of connect with each other. So this is a little bit more nuanced, a little trickier to identify, but it's great to see what themes are overlapping in your activities. So they might not be represented the exact same way, but you might notice as you look at yourself on paper, right, that you might notice, oh, I really am drawn to these types of things, or I really do exhibit certain personality traits. Maybe I'm really creative, and these kind of multiple things show that. And then step four, of course, would be writing that short phrase, that tagline that really captures what is unique about you, and then using that as a strategic kind of framework for the rest of your application. So this is an example here of an actual activities list. So this is something that you would submit in your college application, something admissions officers would read to understand all your extracurricular involvement in high school. So you'll see on the left, it shows what grades you participated in, 9th through 12th. It shows the categories there in the big font. And then on the right, you can see, of course, what your actual role was in what group. So we want to take a second here to challenge you to create an application persona for this student. So if you were to read all of this, for instance, what kinds of themes are you seeing, right? Are you seeing similar things throughout? And you can use the chat function as well. You can just fire off some themes or potential even application personas if you want to jump in and make one yourself. So take a look here and look at what you're noticing or learning about this stranger, right? The same way an admissions officer would look at your work and decide what you think is standing out the most. So what kind of themes are you all seeing? Okay, we see soccer player who's passionate about music. Okay, it's a good one. What else? Music, we're seeing a lot more people saying that. Anything else you're noticing maybe besides music and sports? Read the descriptions. Okay, some community service people are seeing. If you look at the little 2 lines underneath each heading, do you notice anything more specific, maybe about the population they're serving or the types of regions of the world that they're helping or the types of music they're drawn to? Okay, people are saying blogger, journalist, community service, publication, they have global outreach. Okay, good. So you're seeing a lot of different kind of angles on this, but similar themes throughout, right? We're seeing some of those pieces. Perhaps even in the global outreach, you're noticing the types of music they're working on, the types of artists they're collaborating with. Great. Okay, so let's move on. We can see this student's persona could have been something kind of like the aspiring Pan-Pacific music mogul, right? So again, that's just a fancier way of saying everything you guys just said, but definitely covers a lot of those themes. Below are some other examples of potential personas, just to give you a sense. So a creative STEM educator in the making, a cross-cultural communicator for the voiceless. So maybe they're helping a certain population that doesn't get that generally. The last one here, an environmental warrior hoping to change hearts and minds through economic methods, right? So we're seeing environmental and economics kind of blended here. We're seeing maybe cross-cultural communications blended. We're seeing STEM and creativity blended, right? So we're seeing some of those unique themes that are really making these people different from the crowd.
Great. And if I could jump in real quick, Shoshana. So I saw a few of you wrote in soccer, and that's an easy trap to fall into with the application persona, because it's so tempting to want to cover everything. You want to tell the admissions officers everything you want to do, and sure enough, this student spent plenty of time on on soccer because that was one of their activities on the list. So really developing an effective application persona is usually a game of subtraction rather than addition. It's culling away the extra pieces and focusing in very narrowly on one or two very specific things. And as you'll see through these examples, like the aspiring Pan-Pacific music mogul, the more specific you're able to be, the better. So, saying a future scientist is probably the weakest in terms of generalities. Saying future engineer is a little stronger, but still quite weak in terms of specificity. But then if it's, future space station engineer for NASA, now all of a sudden this is getting very specific, right? And that thread throughout your application is going to be very specific on things that interest you about being a physical engineer on the space station for NASA. So I just wanted to point that out, that that's an easy trap to fall into, to want to make a long application persona that describes everything you do, but you really want to try to avoid that when possible.
Great point. And something else, in general, even if you have your application persona doesn't say soccer, that doesn't mean you can't include soccer on your activities list, right? There's going to be things that don't necessarily directly tie into that. But the point of this is to kind of bring these cohesive threads together so that we are seeing those themes, right? We're always going to have extra things in your activities list that maybe aren't exactly related as well, and that's okay. But the goal will be to really kind of think about those themes and emphasizing those themes throughout your application. So the application persona examples kind of often take two approaches, right? So one is that specificity. So a persona that is unique and impressive by showing a very clear interest or a deep knowledge and detailed experience, right? So just like Daniel was just kind of iterating the various kind of steps to narrowing that, this is a good example here. This is a botanist committed to rebuilding endangered flora of Mongolia, right? So this is maybe someone who's interested in nature, right? But we're narrowing that even further into botany, and we're narrowing that even further into endangered flora in a particular area, right? So that's very specific and narrow in terms of its scope. The second approach is more of a diversity approach, or kind of combining two common interests to make something that is more unique. So for instance, a trendy engineer aiming to apply chemical principles for more environmentally friendly fashion, right? So we may know a ton of people who like engineering, we may know a ton of people who like the environment, or a ton of people who like creativity or fashion. But if you kind of squish all those circles together, what's the center of the Venn diagram, really, right? What are you seeing that's really unique about this person? And that is what is uniquely you, right? So we kind of want to think about that. That's a good analogy I sometimes use with my students, is think about your interests as circles and pushing them together. What is that center that really defines you and makes you different from the other engineers out there, the other communications people or journalists, right? What can you kind of draw upon that's even more unique? So in terms of actually evaluating an application persona, you'll want to think about, again, whether this is an unusual or surprising way to describe you, thinking about whether it seems genuine, it seems important, it seems authentic, again, right? Is it really part of something big in terms of the student's personality and interests? Again, you'll want to think about, will you remember this persona at the end of today? Is it something that will resonate with a stranger who reads your application? And then the last thing here is this the persona that will kind of show that this person is interested in contributing to a university community? So when I read applications at Northwestern, we would always say, okay, what kind of potential is a student bringing to our campus community if we admit this student, right? If we let them in, how will they make a positive difference on this community? So hopefully we see kind of pieces of that in your high school experience, that we can make assumptions. Okay, if you came here, you'd probably likely do similar things here, right? So an important question we sometimes get is, what if I'm not applying to school until 2 or 3 years from now? Is it still important to start thinking about a concept like this? Yes, the answer is yes, right? So students applying in the future, it really just means that you even have extra time to craft a strong and unique persona, and that you can actually make more intentional choices about your interests and activities, about what classes you choose to take, about what clubs you choose to deepen your involvement in. I often will tell my youngest students, ninth graders, right, you might be exploring a lot of things and figuring out what you like, and that's great. And then as you get a little bit older, I'd like to see you kind of narrowing that interest so that your persona really starts forming, and that you're not trying to do a million things and being this sort of scattered applicant who kind of skims the surface, right? We want to see that depth and that accomplishment and achievement by the time you graduate. So you're actually better off kind of ditching the things you're not as passionate about and really narrowing in and deepening your focus, so that your persona shines through. Those will be really great traits by the time you apply, to be able to see all the things I've done in the last 4 years that show this evidence. So you can definitely be intentional by exploring the things that you care the most about and making sure you're building evidence of those interests throughout all of your activities in high school. So what else can an application persona show? Again, it can be more than just your interests. It can be a lot about your character and your attitude. So for instance, have your activities shown that you are really curious, or that you're entrepreneurial in spirit, right? That you've created or founded a bunch of things. Am I learning something about maybe your own character or traits, right, in that regard? Another thing I might be able to draw conclusions about are your personal values. So am I seeing that you are standing up for less fortunate people? Are you trying to help your community or impact people in some kind of way through what you've done? Now, that doesn't mean you need to just start doing a bunch of unrelated extracurriculars that are community service oriented, right? You can think about the clubs you're already involved with and have a community focus, right? So if you're in a computer science club, maybe you can start teaching coding to people who are less fortunate, right? Or you can build that in some way to the things you're already doing. Another thing we can learn is about your skills and experience. So again, have you created a business? Are you leading people a lot of the time? Are you really engaged in your community? And then the last thing here would be your ambitions, right? So am I learning about some of your longer term goals through your application persona and your activities at the moment? Am I seeing maybe a drive to become a doctor, or to invent some kind of product, or to change social policy in some kind of way? So we'll want to see those connections to your longer term goals as well. So in terms of longer term persona planning, it's really important to understand that you really do have control over this. So in terms of selecting activities you're a part of, which courses you take as you get more advanced in your studies, can have a huge influence on how your application persona kind of looks on paper. So you do have control over this. It's not an accident, it's not luck. So you can think about considering the types of issues you'd like to address, right? If you care a lot about social justice, for instance, can you start fighting for certain causes? Can you do something to actually make a difference in one of those realms that you care about? Similarly, can you think about the different skills and experiences that you can achieve through your activities, right? Can you showcase your creative side through a bunch of different activities if that's something that really matters to you? Similarly, you can look about your character and principles, the ways they're demonstrated through your activities and actions, and also your unique perspectives on how you influence your community, or how you have explored these perspectives by your interaction with others. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Daniel for the last bullet here, which is our case study of a successful application strategy.
Great, thanks, Shoshana. So we're going to go ahead and meet William, and his application persona is very strong. He is the techie historian pioneering digital humanities. So as we'll see, this is kind of level 5, if there's 5 levels of application personas, because it's doing a lot of work here. In this single sentence, the techie historian pioneering digital humanities is very clear throughout his application. All of his essays revolve around this persona. His letters of recommendation are addressing this persona. His activities and his entire application package is really addressing this persona. So a little bit about William. He's clearly a very strong student. He has good grades, good test scores. Now here's something that's a little tricky. He has a strong interest in history and computer science, okay? So, you know, the first level of application persona, given those interests, the kind of lazy application persona would be, you know, he's a computer science historian, or he's a guy interested in history and computer science. And then you can kind of shape an application based on those 2 interests. And honestly, it's not the worst. They're kind of different, and you know, it could be a little bit memorable. So I mean, that would be like a, you know, I would give that a grade of like a B- or maybe a C+, depending on curve we're all grading on here. Back at Harvard, they kind of gave everybody at least an A- for participating. So that's a little bit what I'm used to. But what we do with William is really take it to the next level by connecting the two things, as you'll see. So as I mentioned, the challenges, William, like a lot of kids, has a lot of academic interests. So unfortunately, we used to call that being well-rounded. And as you see in this sentence, that's now called being unfocused. So, you know, this isn't something I prefer. I'm not espousing my belief in this, but I'm just telling you this is how it is that admissions officers do want to see that you're focused in a very specific way. So just being generally good at a lot of things and generally joining a lot of clubs isn't always that helpful. And in fact, at Ingenious Prep, a lot of times we take students, or we recommend that students exit some clubs actually that muddle, it uses up too much time and doesn't really add to their application candidacy. A second challenge is that William's extracurricular activities were at his school, so that lacks a little bit of initiative. He's kind of doing what's there. He's not going beyond what's already there. And third, it sounds like he was a bit of an undisciplined writer, had some challenges getting his thoughts down on paper. Furthermore, there's some more challenges that are kind of general and also we face with William. In his particular case, and as you guys know from prior webinars, you are compared to other people in your category and in your geographic area. So if you're an Asian male from Texas, you are compared to other Asian males from Texas. You are not compared, you know, to a Black female in Vancouver or something like that. So you have to really know where you lie within the group that you're being compared against. And the facts are that being strong in STEM, playing a classical instrument like the piano or the violin, a little bit of short-term volunteering, model UN, and a career in business and finance, those are quite common in William's application group. So we want to steer him away from those things, which could get him perhaps a little bit lost in the application process. So, you know, even if it were true, an application persona that said, you know, William, the debating violinist, would actually not be a very strong application persona, even if we develop that, because it's lacking that key characteristic of being unique. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess for culture's sake, there are a lot of violinists in high school, and there are a lot of good debaters in high school. So we would really want to focus on what makes him different from the other applicants. So that's why we needed to dig deeper and find a way to make him stand out with these hyper-competitive schools he's interested in. So what we did is with our former admissions officer, like Shoshana, and his graduate coach, we started to focus his energy a little bit. And it really came down to those two items that we talked about, history and computer science. The challenge, therefore, became how do you connect these two seemingly different things? History doesn't have a lot to do with computer science and vice versa. But to really get to that next level of application persona stardom, you really want to be able to combine them in a way that makes sense going forward. And that's where Emily Ulrich came in. She was his academic mentor at Ingenious Prep. She was teaching a class on medieval literature that William was intensely interested in. And the two of them worked together, and he took a very keen interest in this medieval literature when he was working with Emily. And what we started to do is combine his interests through his activities, and William started to translate these historical manuscripts that were, you know, sometimes pictorial, they were old. He translated them and used the original text and started uploading them onto websites that he made with annotations about their historical significance. And William was doing this in a way that you could only do with a very good understanding of computer science. So now he's gone from this, you know, fairly open field of people who like history and people who also like this other general study of computer science. And now he's inserted himself into a fairly small field of people who are using computer science to further the study of medieval literature. So this starts to make William look very interesting all of a sudden. Furthermore, on top of just that he's interested in this, you'll notice he's actually doing something. He's accomplishing something. He's creating a tangible product that at the end of the day he can point to and show people that this is something he did. He another piece of this was that he was able to show the union of the two fields that I went into a little bit. And then finally, we helped him stand out. Some other interesting aspects about William: he was a quirky student. We wanted to pick schools that would be impressed by his unique personality. So together we made a list. We actually went through, decided on what to do, and we decided that Columbia would be the best choice for William. This is just getting a little bit more into our process. His graduate coaches, edited and edited and edited his projects. He gave a lot of very detailed feedback. As you see, there's a paragraph explaining why Advent isn't the right word here. And, some transitions are too abrupt and a little too cryptic. So we really honed his essays to match this this application persona that we'd identified and brought out of William. We also want to make sure that the application persona is clear, and we try to weave that into not only the personal statement, but the additional essays as well. And by helping William become more and more specific about his interests and what he's thinking about, we were able to really let the reader kind of guess that application persona from reading, which is important, because clearly you can't just start a paper saying this is my application persona. So there's a little bit of art to getting it in there, but making it very, very clear for the reader. Finally, just another example of his editing. This is what kind of a paper looks like. So I hope that doesn't scare any of the students on the webinar as much as your parents may like it. It's a tough process. We really want to help students be the best that they can possibly be. So we really look at things once, twice, thrice, many, many times. In fact, at Ingenious, the average number of edits for personal statement is 10. Good news, William got into Columbia University. So they were impressed with this application persona and William in general. And again, what we really focus on with the application persona is that it's memorable. And as Shoshana can tell you, admissions readers are just like anybody else. They have good days and bad days. They, had too much coffee or not enough coffee. They had, they are behind with their work. So anything you can do to kind of package your application in a bow to make their lives easier. And as Shoshana alluded to, a lot of times the single application reader will then have to go and argue on behalf of you to the whole committee. So if you've packaged yourself in a way that makes that job easier, it makes their job easier to argue for you, you've done yourself a lot of favors in the application process. So now we're wrapping up the presentation a little bit. So 3 questions that you can ask yourself about the application persona. Do you or your child have clear aims for what you're trying to achieve with your activities? So I alluded to this earlier, but as I said, a lot of times activities are a little bit scattershot. And what we really want to do is drive those into a narrow wedge that make it very clear what you're trying to achieve with each activity. So, violin plus karate plus soccer plus an after-school art program. That's not really a very clear aim with your activities. And if you were able to change 2 of those activities in a way that made it clear what you were doing, that would help a lot. Number 2, is your child pursuing activities and interests that make them unique among their classmates? So that goes back to that point I had made earlier, that people in the college admissions process are compared against people in their similar pools. So they're going to need to stand out from people in their similar socioeconomic groups, their similar geographies, and similar life circumstances. So you're going to be compared to people who have similar resources as you, and you want to make sure that you're unique among those people. And number 3, are you able to describe your child's unique character, strengths, and experience in no more than 2 sentences? So 1 sentence is preferred, but 2 sentences is okay. And that really, as we said, it's more of a game of subtraction than addition. But if you sit down and purposefully make yourself write this sentence or 2 sentences, that really keeps you honest during the application process. And I know Shoshana said it, but I want to say it again. It's a very purposeful exercise. We don't spend all this time on applications and look at the end, read over it at the end and say, hey, do you know what? This student kind of strikes me as a, a photographic documentarian who's one day going to change the world of immigration studies, right? We don't kind of ad hoc after the fact. We decide on the application persona, and it informs all of our work throughout the application. So those are just 3 questions that I hope help you, and I hope this presentation has been helpful as well. I'm going to leave this up on the screen. This is my contact information. As I said, I'm happy to talk at any time. And then we wanted to open it up to you all to see if you had some application personas you wanted to pass by us. I am not going to read the name of whatever is submitted. I'm just going to read the application persona. So it'll be semi-anonymous, but we would be happy to read any ideas that you may have if you're a student or if you're a parent, an idea you have for your child. And we'd be happy to talk about the strengths, what types of activities might help, what type of activities may detract from the application persona. So feel free to chat us on the chat function. I'll also read a question I just got. How many universities do you suggest for applications? That's a good question for Shoshana.
Sorry, unmuting myself here. So, we usually, a lot of our application packages, I guess, are 10 schools. So a lot of students apply to about 10 schools. I think it depends how competitive the list is, of course, right? So if you want a lot of reach schools on your list, you'll of course need to have that balance and make sure that you have some targets and some safeties on your list as well. But usually I would say about 3 to 4 reach, 3 to 4 target, and about 2 to 3 safeties would be a good balanced kind of mix. Of course, that's just a starting point, so you could definitely scale it down. I know when I personally applied way back when, I only applied to 6 schools, but I feel like more and more these days people are applying to more schools. So I would say the most important thing is the balance, right? Making sure that you have a good range of competitiveness levels.
That's great advice, Shoshana. And I'd say starting at 10 plus or minus is a good rule of thumb. I also want to add just a little bit about coronavirus and our current stance as a company on what to expect. So essentially what we're expecting in the next cycle is more variance. So we're not saying it's going to be easier or harder to get into a school, but we're saying it is going to be, people are going to be more surprised by the decision and the admit and deny decision. So we're expecting a lot of our students to be surprised to the upside in getting into schools that they really didn't think they had much of a shot at. But unfortunately, we're also expecting some surprise to the downside, where students are not getting into the schools they sort of expected they might get into. And that just goes with the ever-changing situation with coronavirus, the taking away of data points from testing. And just to real quickly go over our rule of thumb as it stands right now for our students with testing, you pretty much always, as a rule, want to send in your test scores, okay? There's a few situations where you don't turn in your test scores. One of those situations is if it's a reach school and your score is below the 25th percentile. So schools will give you the middle 50 percentile of their test range. If your score falls below that range and you have the option to not submit it, you want to not submit it. You want to exercise that option because this is a reach school for you, and then the school is going to look at your other activities and essays and letters of recommendation, and you'll have a higher chance of getting in. If you have extremely high test scores, if you're over 1500 on the SAT or over 34 on the ACT, always turn them in. As a blanket rule, always turn them in on a test optional school. And then finally, the third caveat is if your score doesn't reflect the rest of your application very well. So for example, if you're a 4.0 student, you're a valedictorian or close to it, and you have a 1210 SAT score, this imbalance is going to throw the application reader off. And if you have the opportunity to not submit that score and not confuse the application reader, we're recommending students to not do that. But just to recap, as a general rule, you almost always want to turn in your score for schools that are test optional. All right, I'm going to turn here to some questions. All right, here's one. If my child has 2 interests that are unique, is it important to combine the 2 and find an intersection between those 2 interests?
So I would say typically that's what will make you more unique in as a general rule. So like I said in one of those examples, there might be a lot of engineers and there might be a lot of artistic people, but are there many artistic engineers, right? That might be that intersection that makes you unique from the pack. So I guess depending what those interests are, and if they seamlessly combine or you can find intentional ways to combine them, I would say typically, yes, the more you're able to kind of overlap your interests and themes, it will kind of show that more unique aspects of yourself. So that is a general, I think, strategy, but not a blanket rule, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I would say during this presentation, we've really gone over the application persona strategy that we use 90% of the time, which is combining two separate interests in a way that intersect and make sense going forward. There's another way to do it as well. I think it was alluded to in the slides. The example would be the Mongolian botanist. So you can find one subject and just go incredibly deep on that one subject. You can be the absolute expert on flora of Mongolia and spend your entire high school career focusing on this one very unique subject. Or if you're incredibly good at a subject. I mean, we spent a lot of time bashing orchestra players. I have to admit, I was a violinist. I still am technically, I guess, but I don't play that much anymore. But if you're truly the best cellist in the United States or in your state, that is an application persona that would work. We just don't trumpet that very much because it's very rare that that's the case. So there are edge cases where you can look at one particular interest or one particular skill and just totally focus on that. But that's really the exception rather than the rule. So to answer your question directly, yes, I think it would be very awesome if you could find that intersection of those two activities. Okay, and I'm going to read these out loud as I see them, so hopefully you don't have any bad words or anything. Do the application readers read all the students from the same school together? In other words, do the top schools group students from the same school to be read initially by the same admissions officer?
Yeah, so usually admissions officers will be grouped by region or of the world or the United States, depending. So typically, someone will be in charge of a region. When I read at Northwestern, I kind of grew up near Northwestern, so I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. I went to a really huge high school myself in the north suburbs, so actually our region was really small. It was just the suburbs of Chicago. But another region might be all of East Asia, right? Depending on the number of applicants or the number of admissions officers available on the team, for instance. So there might be one person reading all of China and Korea and Japan, for instance. That might be their region, right? In those cases, the students from those schools would kind of be lumped together and read by that admissions officer. But yes, we would look at by high school as well. So again, like Daniel said before, it's all taken in context. So if your school reports class rank or even when I read, we would get a list of all the applicants from that high school and be able to literally compare them on a piece of paper, actually, because the school summarized that. But it's different by school, right? So it depends a little bit there. But the general rule of thumb is yes, you'll be kind of lumped by regional context.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I was doing a webinar a few weeks ago with someone who used to read for Johns Hopkins, and they mentioned like there's a few magnet schools that everyone knows about, like Thomas Jefferson, for example, in Virginia. And she was saying they set aside a whole day just to read TJ kids. So it's kind of unfortunate to say, but you very much are compared to your classmates.
Yep.
Okay, this is great. Thank you for who, I know who submitted this, but I'm not going to say the name out loud, but we got an application persona. We got a stab at it, so let's see what we say. An inquisitive student activist, specifically gun violence prevention, and aspiring bioengineer interested in public policy and bioethics. Okay, so that's a really great start to an application persona. And from my first reading of it, not knowing the background, it does sound like there's a little bit of two personas there. So in my, again, this is very off the cuff, but from my reading of that, there's kind of this one application persona that's using academics, using their interest in science and politics to somehow address the very serious and real issue of gun violence. And then there's also this other interest in bioengineering and bioethics. So to me, it would be quite difficult to combine those two things. But with either of those two general subjects, you could create another combination that would be very powerful. So if you were interested in bioengineering something in order to help, oh geez, I don't know, so the prevention, somehow tie that to the prevention of violence or the prevention of disease or something with a greater political purpose, then you could kind of combine that activist political bent with the bioengineering bent. And similarly with gun violence, there are sciences that you could pursue, or social sciences that you could pursue, either one, to help kind of attack or investigate or help solve or ameliorate the gun problem. Off the top of my head, I don't see a very clear link between bioengineering and the gun violence. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Shoshana.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think that you're getting at the specificity, which is great. So kind of like the student activism, and then even more narrowly, maybe gun violence prevention, especially if you're seeing that theme throughout your application. Maybe you've been in multiple groups that address this particular thing. Maybe you've done research on this particular thing that will be kind of shining through. But I agree, there might be a little bit too much to juggle. And again, that doesn't mean you have to completely exclude some of these things from your application, but it means that things you're kind of stressing and emphasizing the most are a little bit more narrow, and that the admissions officer will remember those things, right? So I would say, like, for instance, if you've really done a ton with gun violence prevention, that alone would be probably enough of like a buzzword thing to remember, right? I'd love to see maybe if you are a bioengineer, if you've done something in engineering that related to that in some way, or if you're into, you know, bioethics and maybe more of the anatomy or something, maybe you've done research on protecting victims of gun violence, right? And maybe that's kind of tied in some way, or you've done research on that in some way from the bio side. But yeah, I agree. I think you're getting at it in terms of specificity. I think right now it probably is covering too many things still to be able to properly kind of infuse this throughout your application, though.
That's a really good start, though. I totally agree. Here's another one. Using journalism to promote social wellness and kindness, care for mental health of the community by doing related community service, and also love writing and writing novels and being a dedicated dancer. So do you want to take a stab at that, Shoshana, or would you like me to?
Sure. I mean, I think there's some really good themes here. Obviously, the community-oriented person is being shown here, right? Having the kind of social wellness, mental health, and concerned with community services in general. I'm also seeing some creativity, right? So the dancing, maybe the creative writing, the journalism. So I think you could kind of whittle that down a little bit more to kind of like maybe you are the creative, aspiring journalist who uses communication to make change, right? Or to do something maybe in the mental health community, if that's a big piece you want to shine through. So often I typically will say, like, the person who blah, blah, blah in order to blah, 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 right? That's often a phrasing I think that works well, especially if you have a couple interests or things that you use as a tool in this case. Particularly something like writing is a great one, because you might be a journalist or someone who likes creative writing, but ultimately, what do you do with that writing? Or why do you like writing? What is that as a medium for something else you care about? And I think the dancing kind of ties into the creative element. So I probably wouldn't put dance maybe directly in. That's kind of perhaps taking away, but I think the creative elements would still shine through quite a bit. And your dance would be an example of that creative side still. But I love the pieces about the community. It definitely looks like it's a community-oriented person. So I'd want to see a little more maybe what the mental health part is, or again, what you're using the writing or journalism for.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the dancing stands out to me as something to probably remove from the application persona. You can still absolutely and should absolutely put the awards on the honor section, write the activities, the dancing activities on the activities list. But when you really focus on that application persona, to me, that sounds like a bit of an outlier. And journalism, mental health, helping the community, creative writing, those kind of fit together. So there is a straight line there. I'm not here to tell you exactly what that is. That's something we do work on with our students over several weeks and sometimes months. But you know, if you're writing, say you're writing fiction to soothe people with anxiety disorders, right? And then you have this big website that, you know, for certain different anxiety disorders, you've written these novels that are specifically designed to make people feel better with certain disorders. Like that, you know, that's just an idea. I don't know if it's a good one, but something like that, where as Shoshana said, you're using your talent for another goal, and you are passionate about both of those. That would really help you stand out in the application process. Let me read another one. Should I aspire to find an academic intersection between two interests, or just emphasize common character traits between those two? So I think we tried to go over this a little bit. Ideally, you use one for the other. They really mesh well. There's an intersection. Sometimes you can just use two, and that's not quite as strong, but you can also do that. Another question, can you repeat that about the SATs? Generally, send in your SAT scores. There's a few edge cases where you don't send in your SAT scores, but you almost always want to. And sorry, I'm looking over here, everyone. My camera exists over on this side of the screen, so I know it looks a little weird. How to brand someone who has published 2 books, produced 8 songs. Oh, he's like the Pan-Pacific music mogul.
Maybe.
Produced 8 songs, who sang, composed, mixed, etc. Haven't released yet, and started a podcast. They're also top student and very balanced. So that sounds like the start of some really strong a really strong application persona to me. It's not a finalized application persona, but if you're able to show your publishing chops, your creative chops in a way that's unique to you, and I see that through the podcast and the songs, then depending on what platform they're on and if they get some interest and if people like them, it seems like you're kind of doing something across multiple mediums to get your word out there, right? You're using books, you're using podcasts, you're using music. So you're using all these different mediums to get your message out there. I suppose the question would be, what is that message? It could be just to entertain people, to delight people. It could be deeper than that. But I think that is a great start. I don't know if you have anything to add to that persona, Shoshana.
Yeah, I love the idea of the kind of multimedia communicator who does, you know, maybe uses a creative expression to something, right? So what are you doing with these books and songs and podcasts, just like Daniel's saying? Are they for a broader purpose? And ideally, the answer is yes. And the answer is something that is community oriented in some way, or can be kind of shaped that way, so that colleges can see that you are, again, someone who will add value to their campus community, someone that will make a positive difference on the lives of others, and kind of uses your talents for a broader purpose, right? So we're not just someone who sits in a studio by ourselves doing these creative expressions, right? We're hopefully using that work in some way to get it out there. So I'd love to see kind of what you're doing with that. But I love the idea that Danielle said about kind of the multimedia. My mind was going that way too, just from the different various things that you mentioned. So I kind of see you as like a multimedia communicator, and who's using maybe some version of creative expression, again, for some purpose that I don't yet know, but I'd love to learn more as you write yours.
Great. All right, I'll read the next one. Thank you so much. You guys are welcome. Are there personas are these personas supposed to encapsulate your high school career or show what you plan to study in college? What if I haven't had the chance to explore the intersection deeply in high school? So this is a great question, and a much deeper question in terms of the entire application process and what colleges and people like Shoshana look for when they're working in admissions. Because really it's a story, right? And the admissions officers are looking at what you've done and how that's going to inform them about what you're going to do. So I don't know, Shoshana, if you have more to say about the interaction between what you've done and where you're going.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, you know, typically we would say the persona is based on what you've done in high school and what you plan to do with that, right? So how you're going to build upon your experiences. So it's kind of a both is the answer to that. I think if you haven't had a chance to deeply explore something in high school, you know, I'd love to see what you have explored or what you kind of envision some of those things allowing you to do later on. What are some of your academic goals, right? What might you want to major in, you know, when you apply to college? What might you want your job to be one day, right? And admissions officers will know that these things will likely change in college, right? You are still young, you're still learning about yourself quite a bit. You will continue doing that in college. But I think a really big thing to point out is that admissions offices want to see that you are a focused person in high school and that you have intentional goals for college and beyond, right? So often admissions officers will think about you as an applicant using this college experience as a platform to then go on and do whatever you think you're going to do, right? And that, again, will likely change in the 4 years you're there. But ideally, you are connecting those goals to your application and saying, you know, hey, to the Columbia admissions officer, that Columbia would be a great school for me because I can do XYZ on your campus and eventually go on to do these broader things I really care about. And hopefully those will all kind of be a thread through what you've already done as well.
Yeah.
I think,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I just want to caution people against just providing these kind of pie in the sky ideas for what they want to do in the future without providing a lot of evidence for why that's likely to happen. So college admissions officers totally know that you're in high school, that, you know, they know they're looking at things you did when you were 12 years old. You know, they're not going to expect that you successfully completed a brain surgery as a sophomore in high school, even though you may become a very renowned brain surgeon in the years to come. So it is looked at in that prism, but at the same time, you really shouldn't be applying to Johns Hopkins undergrad in your senior year saying, you know, I'm going to be the best brain surgeon in the world. I didn't have time to take AP Bio. I didn't really get around to physics. You know, my math scores are pretty low. But, you know, just believe me, I have a passion about it. You have no idea how much I want to do it. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. So that's just kind of a general rule to stay away from, is to kind of make these claims and as impressive and as bold as it can be. If there's no evidence and things you've actually done, that it's a harder sell for the admissions officer. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. It's 2 minutes left. I'm sorry for everyone we didn't get to. My email and WeChat are on the screen. You can feel free to reach out to me later. Well, this is a good question. Do you need to revise your persona for different university programs, or do you stick to one persona the entire time?
Yeah, I would say typically you're going to make one strategy because likely your activities list and your personal statement, for instance, will be the main chunks that you send to the schools. Obviously your supplemental essays will be different at every school, but you will have a bulk of your application kind of completed. While you do have the ability to go in and change those with every application, it gets really complicated and it might muddy the waters a little bit. So I would caution you from doing that. If, however, a program like a college you're looking at has a really niche program that is super like the best fit for you ever, and your application persona really has to be kind of tweaked to make that case for yourself, I think that's fine, right? To have sort of that mindset. And again, knowing that the application persona is sort of a strategic thing in your mind anyway, right? You're not writing it down and sending it off with your application. So if your strategy slightly changes due to, for instance, a very niche program that one school offers that another one doesn't, for instance, you might more heavily maybe provide evidence of that interest because of this unique program that school offers, when maybe the other schools you're applying to more of a general major that exists in many schools. So I think you could tweak it a bit. Again, your strategy will likely stay the same throughout because if it's a good application persona, it is probably, hopefully, very good indicator of who you are and what you care about. So that will likely apply to every school that you end up applying to. So yeah, if it kind of does make sense in your mind, I think you can make that slight adjustment, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Shoshana again. I would say 99.9% of cases, you have one persona. It's for the Common App. It's for some additional schools. You know, you could give me some edge case where some student, you know, only wants to go to Smith College or Caltech, and those are his only two colleges he's applying to. And, you know, those personas are going to have to be a little different just because of the specificity of the schools. But in you're really going to want to stick to one persona. So I think that's right. Well, okay. So Shauna, thank you so much for joining us, and everybody else, thank you so much. We're going to make a recording of this, and people can email either the Ingenious staff they've been talking to on WeChat or wherever you've been talking, or to me. And typically what we do is we put these up for 1 week for people to watch who missed it. So thanks everybody so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.